All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Popular Music Books in Process. I'm Eric Weisbard, joined today by Miles Marshall Lewis and Skiz Fernando. Our series, Popular Music Books in Process, or PMBiP, is co-sponsored by the Journal of Popular Music Studies, the Pop Conference, and IASPM US. We don't have with us today our third co-organizer, Carl Wilson, who wandered into a pothole in Toronto. So we were thinking about you, Carl. We also need to offer some quick congratulations to former presenter Hanif Abdurraqib on winning a MacArthur Fellowship this week, making him the second PMBiP presenter with the MacArthur after Alex Ross, but probably not the last. And also congrats to Eric Harvey, who presented earlier in the series and whose book Who Got the Camera came out this week as well. Next week in the series, be on the lookout. Kelefa Sana is going to be here talking about his new much touted book, Major Labels. I suspect we'll have some arguments going. If you've ever missed one of the previous sessions in the series, just look for Popular Music Books in Process on YouTube, which, unlike Facebook, I believe is still working today. So you can see all of the 50 plus sessions there on my Facebook page. And I think that's the main thing. So let's talk about today. Our theme today, Lyrical Laureates of Hip Hop, features two new books. Miles Marshall Lewis talking about Promise That You Will Sing About Me, The Power and Poetry of Kendrick Lamar, which is newly out on St. Martin's Press. I think I saw a Rocks Back Pages podcast today, and possibly several other promotional events that Miles can tell us about. He's a well-known, long-standing music writer. In addition to his new book, he's written an essay collection, Scars of the Soul or Why Kids Wear Bandages When They Don't Have Bruises, about coming of age in the Bronx. He's got a book in the 33 1/3 series, if I'm not mistaken. There's a Riot Going On, and series editor and founder of Bronx Biannual, literary journal, lives in Harlem. And his next book, he has the guts to tell us before it's even done, is a cultural biography of Dave Chappelle. Joining Miles today is S.H. Fernando Jr., who we will call Skiz, and he is also really, this is taking me back to my brief-lived Village Voice music editing days. These are true troopers in the field of music writing, going all the way back to the 1990s. Penned one of the first big works on hip hop, The New Beats, exploring the music, culture, and attitudes of hip hop back in 1994. Freelanced for the New York Times, Rolling Stone, The Source, Vibe. Also ran an independent label, Word Sound Recordings, from 94 to 2005, releasing, this is true, 65 full-length albums. Yep. Nice. And including his own productions of Spectre, has written and directed a couple of documentary features, The Greatest Thing You Never Heard and Industria Brasileira, made in Brazil. Also published a book on Sri Lankan home cooking, a New York Times notable cookbook. So we have hip hop to talk about and perhaps room for some savory afterthoughts. All right, to Miles and Skiz, welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, one last comment and then I promise to shut up. The structure of our event is we encourage attendees to put comments and questions in the chat during the event. Anything you're thinking of after the event, we send the presenters the text of that chat so they have a chance to see your immediate reaction. And then Kim Mack, our co-organizer, will use the comments and questions to structure a Q&A at the end. Now I'm done.
Thank you, Eric. Good looking out. I guess I'm gonna kick this off, right? What's up, Skiz? How are you?
How you doing, Miles? Everything good over here?
I'm good, I'm good. I'm glad to lay eyes on you. You know, we've been sort of, I don't know, like troubadours in the hip hop, you know, scribe land. And, you know, I've never like actually seen you.
No doubt. Well, I'm one of those. I'm one of those characters who plays the shadows. So
Yeah, I hear you. No, we've definitely read each
good
other.
to see you too.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. So I'm gonna jump right in, right? So this is my presentation, right? This is Promise That You Will Sing About Me, the power and poetry of Kendrick Lamar. It was out like last Tuesday, I guess. It's been out like 6 days now, and I chose Kendrick Lamar because he's like a fascinating hip hop figure to me. I grew up in the Bronx, and I was born in 1970, and so I knew of hip hop from before Rapper's Delight came out, right? I had a series of grandparents who lived in 2 different sections of the South Bronx, and so I saw breakdancing, and I heard DJs. Specifically, Cool DJ AJ, the late Cool DJ AJ, who was immortalized in a Curtis Blow song, AJ Scratch. My uncle took me out to see him in St. Mary's Park when I was too young to understand what was going on, 7 years old or whatever. And so I've always had this love of hip hop, right? All the elements, right? DJing, graffiti, hip hop, breakdancing, and I've had my share of love for different MCs, right? And being 50 years old, my ear is not what it was in terms of, let's say, appreciating the cater of like mumble rappers that are very popular, all the various Lil Babies and Lil this and Lil that. But Kendrick Lamar, to me, he just sort of stands head and shoulders above the rest. On a pop level, sure, there's Kendrick and there's Drake and there's Kanye, and they are, 3 of the biggest deals going on in hip hop culture anyway. And definitely I'm familiar with all of them, and I have my opinions and stuff. But lyrically, no one's touching Kendrick. Out of the 3 of them, certainly. And so a biography of Kendrick Lamar exists already. I think the one dropped last year by Marcus Moore. But my publisher knew of his book when they signed my deal. So they knew that my approach to Kendrick was going to be different. I was heavily influenced by Jay-Z's Decoded, which was ghostwritten by Dream Hampton, and was an excellent book where his lyrics were broken down, but also as a memoir, his story was bolstered by the illustrations, by the photographs that appear in the book. And it's almost like a coffee table book in a sense. And that was sort of the approach that I took with my book. So there's plenty of illustrations, there's plenty of photographs in between me saying what I have to say. On top of which, in the style of 48 Laws of Power with let's say in the margins of the 48 Laws of Power, there are different quotes about power from different powerful people throughout the ages. What I wanted to do with my book was sort of include commentary from people like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Alicia Garza of the Black Lives Matter movement, and Darnell L. Moore, who has excellent things to say about the misogynoir of certain Kendrick songs. And Greg Tate is in there, and Powers is in there. I have maybe 14 different voices that I felt could do a lot of the heavy lifting and intellectually in terms of the book while I do my thing. It's funny that Hanif Abdurraqib was awarded the MacArthur Grant this week because he got that award based on how his style of writing blends autobiography with racial commentary and social commentary, and I feel I do the same thing, and I feel that that's what a lot of the mentors and people that I grew up with, Nelson George and Greg Tate and people like that, do much the same thing. So hats off to Hanif, because I love the way he does what he does. I've read his books, and he's an excellent writer. But that is the style of this book as well. I definitely sprinkle it with my autobiography, different things that sort of make sense in terms of me growing up in the Bronx and seeing a lot of the South Bronx and the hard scrabble conditions thereof, and Kendrick being from Compton and going through a lot of the same things. I feel that even though there's maybe 19 years of difference between he and I, that I know where he's coming from, and in his lyrics, I get it. based on what I've seen, and what else can I say about the book? I mean, I wanted to take a creative approach to his book because I felt as though I wanted to create something that was sort of as creative as what Kendrick himself creates on his albums. It would have been easier to do like a typical biography where from chapter 1 to the last chapter, you sort of chronologically break down somebody's life, and then in the center there are photographs of the person, from being born to whatever their highest success. Like that's, I don't want to say that's the easy way to do it, but that's the standard way to do it. And so I wanted to take a more creative approach because I felt like Kendrick's creativity sort of lent itself to making something on the same sort of wavelength as what he does. And that's the book. I mean, it's out. I taught a Kendrick Lamar class actually at the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, which is an offshoot of NYU. I did that before COVID hit, actually. I believe it was the spring of 2019, probably. And so it was while I was writing the book. They invited me, Jason King, actually, who's another one of the commentators in my book, invited me to lecture, to do my course, Kendrick Lamar, and the history of hip hop at the Clive Davis Institute. So he invited me to do that because he knew that I was writing a book already about Kendrick. And I learned a lot from those students. It was cool. It was my first teaching opportunity. And those kids, it's so funny to call them kids, but yeah, the various 20-somethings in that class taught me a lot about Kendrick and about the current state of hip hop. It was very cool. I had Dayton Thomas, the editor-in-chief of Vibe, stop by to say some words, I think, when Nipsey Hussle died. And we had some very cool dialogues, and some of their insights ended up in the book. Actually, I thanked one or two students in the acknowledgments. But yeah, just in terms of me being a lifelong hip hop lover and appreciating lyricism above all, and being a fan and a child of Rakim and Big Daddy Kane and KRS-One and of course Biggie and Pac and Jay-Z and all the luminaries from the 80s and 90s, I felt like Kendrick, above anyone else, is like carrying that torch for the modern age. And naturally Wu-Tang, which goes without saying, you'll pick up on all of that, Skiz. But yeah, I felt like, okay, if I was gonna write about any prominent hip hop figure right now, it would either be Kanye or it would be Kendrick. There's a lot to say about Kanye, and I'm aware that my colleague John Caramanica of the New York Times is writing a Kanye biography right now that I can't wait to read, certainly. And I'm thinking of actually tapping him as one of the commentators for my Dave Chappelle book, which is the next thing that I have on tap that I'm sort of researching right now. I believe I know for sure that Dave Chappelle has a Netflix special, a new Netflix special airing at midnight tonight that I can't wait to see. So that's where we are, that's where we are. How do you feel about Kendrick, Skiz? I mean,
Miles, let me tell you, man, I was a casual fan before reading your book, and your book really blew me away. Kudos on the book, first of all, because it's,
thank you very much.
It's one of the best music books I've read recently.
I appreciate it.
You bring an amazing depth of feel to the subject, because it's not really just about Kendrick. You bring so much context to it, which allowed an older head like me to appreciate Kendrick. Because as I said, I was a casual fan. I'm aware of his big albums, To Pimp a Butterfly, Damn. I saw him perform on those award shows where he just had these incendiary performances, and that's what really actually got me noticing him in the first place. Okay. But the context that you bring to it as a music writer, as a historian, as someone who grew up in the Bronx, it really makes this book special, I think.
Thank you.
It's like you bring all these unrelated stories, like that black hippie who was killed at Altamont. I knew nothing about that story. I don't know where you got that from, but
Really?
that was like so interesting.
Oh,
And then
wow.
how you tied it to the Kendrick's group, you know, the Black hippie group.
Sure.
It was just amazing. And after reading this book, I have such a deeper appreciation for Kendrick, because to be honest, I was thinking, I mean, this guy's a young artist. Like, how much can you say about a young artist, you know?
Right.
But
Right.
you have really contextualized it, and and also another thing, as I was reading along, I had YouTube up, and I was
great.
like, I had missed all his mixtapes, you know?
Okay. Yeah, that's
So
a
I
vital.
was
Yeah.
checking out the videos of
Right.
that stuff as I was reading it. I was like, and it actually brought me to tears, you know, some of his lyrics. And I think you really capture that, you know. I mean, this guy is an incredible artist for any generation, you know, but
I agree.
But
yeah,
you know,
I made the point to sort of contextualize him in the scheme of popular music on a whole, you know.
right.
Some could say it's reaching, right? But I mean, I went out of my way to sort of compare him to like Marvin Gaye and the concept albums that Marvin Gaye was releasing, beginning with What's Going On in the 70s, just because of Kendrick's, political aspect. I mean, the song All Right, as we all know, from To Pimp a Butterfly got co-opted by the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, during the protests and rallies beginning in 2015. A lot of those activists sort of started chanting the lyrics to All Right during protests and made the song sort of a modern day We Shall Overcome, you know, in a sense. And that's a huge thing, you know. It's nothing to be taken for granted that hip hop still has that kind of power. You know, I remember when Public Enemy dropped Fight the Power, right? And it was the centerpiece for Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. But the video for it was sort of like a fake protest, you know, in Brooklyn, where they had like placards and stuff. And it was like a protest that turned into a block party. And I felt like that's pretty much what Kendrick sort of did in a nutshell with All Right. It was like, you know, there was a celebratory aspect to it, but also definitely a heavy protest aspect to it that we don't really see as often as we used to during that highly touted sort of socially conscious era of hip hop that old heads, you know, love to talk about, with Poor Righteous Teachers and KRS-One and Brand Nubian and all of that, you know.
And another thing I loved was the like you said, the non-linear aspect of the book, and also how you used yourself in it. You know, back in the day, like when I was writing for the Source and stuff like that, you probably know this too. It used to be almost like a thing for writers to insert themselves into the story. Like,
sure.
Oh yeah, but it was more to look cool. Like, oh yeah, I was
right
with Snoop Dogg.
Right.
But the way that you use it is so great. You know, it's just like, I think without your input in there, it would be a whole different book too, you know. So I really appreciate that you put yourself in there, because as you said, you know, you did the Ebony article on him, and you talked about the kind of the behind the scenes of that, and that, you know, that's stuff that people don't really get to read about, you know, because as a journalist, you do the article, and what we see is what you print on the page, but we saw a whole behind the scenes aspect to that, and that really added a lot to the book too. So
sure. Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I read Joan Morgan's recent book on Lauryn Hill. I think it came out probably 2 years ago. There was an anniversary of the miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and she released a book that was timed to the release of that. And she did a similar thing, you know, because she's always done a similar thing, going back to her work for the Village Voice, even in Vibe afterwards. You know, as I say, Hanif just won the MacArthur Grant, you know, for a similar style that he does extremely well.
But
and
it's a fine line.
There's a fine line, right?
You could look like you're just bigging yourself up, you know?
Right. No, it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act, definitely, and you have to be careful with it. You know, Michael A. Gonzalez actually is someone who's really excellent at that. You know,
I love Michael's stuff, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You can never just insert yourself in the story for the sake of inserting yourself in the story, but it does sort of allow readers to resonate with what the higher point that you're trying to make a lot of times, and it just humanizes the story, because you know it's easy to write the history of Kendrick Lamar and for it to sound like an extended Wikipedia entry. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like just hitting the beats of his career, you know, where they fall, and you end up with something that's kind of flat, you know. So to draw readers in, I've always sort of used a bit of autobiography where relevant and where it's called for. And in this book, I really felt like, you know, I was able to sort of stretch out with that. And I'm glad that it worked, in your opinion.
Well, kudos, man. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very easy read, you know. Very different from my book. Very different from my book. I don't know
yeah,
how
well, let's get into
you got it. All right, well.
Yeah, I'll pass you the baton. Like, you know,
All
break
right.
down your book. I love Wu-Tang, and I'm a lifelong fan, and I'm glad that you were the one to do it.
Thanks, man. This is it. This is the book cover. This from the Streets of Shaolin, the Wu-Tang Saga. Cover art, amazing drawing by David Cho. I should mention too.
Okay.
So I wanted to kind of start off with some lyrics, since we're talking about the lyrical, you know, the lyrical laureates. I'm not gonna try to rap it. I'll just recite it.
I was like, you about to rhyme? What? About to battle?
Got some bars here. I bomb atomically. Socrates,
philosophies and hypotheses.
Can't define how I
drop the knees. Mockeries.
Lyrically performed armed robbery. Flee with the lottery. Possibly they spotted me. I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that line.
I love that line.
That was Inspector Deck's lead-off verse for Triumph, which was the first single off Wu-Tang Forever, the second Wu-Tang album. And you know, everyone knows when you think of lyrical power, you think of Wu-Tang. You got an army of lyrical strength here. You know, a nine-man army. And I was lucky enough in the 90s to spend a lot of time with Wu-Tang, and especially the RZA and the GZA. And it was just incredible being around these guys, because, you know, coming from where they're coming from and where I'm coming from, we come from two different backgrounds, but yet, you know, like minds connect. And you know, I learned a lot. I learned a lot hanging out with these guys and watching them. And basically, my book is more, you know, Wu-Tang has been around for like 30 years, so that's why you got like a textbook here. It's impossible to tell their story in a short form. That's why I wanted to do, you know, a serious book about them, because to really understand Wu-Tang, you got to understand the 5%er Nation. You got to understand Kung Fu flicks.
Yep.
You got to understand what New York was like in the 70s and 80s. It was a lot different town, you know.
The crack era.
Exactly, the crack era, Times Square in the 70s, a real sleazy pit. And you had these young kids, RZA, you know, and his cousin, Old Dirty, who used to go see Kung Fu flicks there, stay out all night. And, you know, they were inspired by these Kung Fu flicks. And I think, you know, one way that RZA and I connected was I'm Sri Lankan by birth, and most of the people in Sri Lanka are Buddhist. So I grew up in a Buddhist household. And RZA, you know, from the Kung Fu movies, he absorbed a lot of Buddhist philosophy. So, you know, like I've given him books on Buddhism and stuff like that. This dude is a real intelligent brother, and he's like so much information, you know, and it's like it was almost like a pleasure to hang out with these guys every time I had a chance. And you know, I talk about I keep myself out of this book because there's enough, you know, to talk about with the Wu, but In the preface, I did mention one incident where I happened to be in the mastering studio when they were doing the Jizza Liquid Swords album. And RZA drafted me to be on a skit, which was the skit that precedes Killer Hills 10304. And I played the drug dealer, Mr. Greco. So there's a little,
I never knew that.
yeah, there's a little anecdote about that in the preface. But for the body of the book, I keep myself out of it. And the book is basically divided into 3 sections. The first one is called Knowledge Born, and it's about their early life and influences, about how they grew up in poverty, grew up in the projects. You know, Wu-Tang is really the first group that, you know, represents the project life like they did. Because, you know, as I know, in the 90s, all the big groups that were coming out, even like Public Enemy, Eric B. and Rakim, EPMD, these guys are all from the burbs. You know, people don't realize that they're all from Strong Island. You know, they all came from like nice houses and manicured lawns.
Right.
You know, Rakim, as street and as ghetto as he sounds, he came from a 2-parent family where everyone in the family plays a musical instrument. You know.
Right.
So
even Hollis, Queens was kind of like nice.
Exactly. Even where
nice
Run DMC came from was a middle-class neighborhood. So
right.
these guys are coming from the lowest of the low, the bottom of the bottom. And one thing that I found in doing the research is that, you know, a lot of their mothers, you know, a lot of single mother households, a lot of their moms knew each other growing up. Raekwon's mom and Ugod's mom, and, you know, RZA's mom, they all knew each other from growing up in the projects. So we're talking about generational poverty, you know?
Right.
And as you mentioned, the crack era in the 80s, when that hit, that totally changed the whole scene in New York, you know? And it's like, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna work at McDonald's for like minimum wage? Or are you gonna hit the block and make like $1,000 a week, you know? And
for sure. Yeah, I heard that Meth was raised on the Staten Island ferry or something.
Yeah, exactly. You know, he had a good paying job, and you know, eventually he was forced into that lifestyle. You know, no one wants to do that, and I think that's an important distinction to make, because Wu-Tang, even though they talk about that gritty lifestyle, they're not glorifying it at all. You know, I would make a distinction between their music and kind of like the gangster rap that was popular at the time.
Right.
And you know, kind of Kendrick kind of came up under that influence too, right? And
Definitely.
I was shocked to learn that Kendrick was like a straight A student, never smoked weed in his life, or he smoked weed that one time, but it was laced with PCP.
Yeah.
You know, and Wu-Tang is another group that is kind of, people in the know that like they dabble with the dust back in the day.
Oh yeah,
like that was
they
around.
did it on purpose.
That was it. That was in their element.
Right. Like that was the point.
They liked it a little too much, maybe.
Yeah.
But you know, Wu-Tang to me, just in the 90s, when you had so much good hip hop going on, you had like Nas, Gang Starr,
for sure,
you know, Digging in the Crates crew, EPMD. You had all these amazing rappers. I think Wu-Tang really, even in that era, they distinguished themselves with their lyricism, with their knowledge, and you know, a lot of that goes back to the 5% Nation of Islam. As I discussed in the book, I have a whole nation. I have a whole chapter on like the origins of the 5%. And you know, it's a splinter group of the Nation of Islam, but they really went after kids and people who were in prison and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure.
And these guys, you know, Wu-Tang were all street kids, and they grew up under that influence. And it really was a positive influence to them. Even though there's a lot of stuff you can say about, you know, the 5%ers, but it was a positive influence to these brothers, and they took that knowledge and they just ran with it. And you know, the whole concept of the gods, you know, thinking of yourself as a god. To me, everyone is a god. everyone
I
has
agree.
that, everyone has that latent potential within them,
Sure.
We just
Sure.
don't recognize that,
Sure.
And you recognize that when you create something, because God is a creator. Artists are creators, writers are creators. When you tap into that creativity, that's when you recognize that. And I think that's what they recognized in themselves. And another thing is also the concept of uniting around one common cause.
Okay.
In the ghetto, you hear about all this thing about crabs in a barrel. You're trying to get out of this environment, but people are constantly pulling you back in and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
But they were able to unite around RZA's vision, and they kind of laid a blueprint to me for everyone else to follow. And I've certainly followed that blueprint in my own life. And
Okay.
having nothing to do with hip hop or music, just the daily life. And Wu-Tang, I think, just introduced that spiritual vibe to hip hop, and I think I see that same thread continued in Kendrick's work. That's why I really appreciate him. Obviously,
Definitely.
I really appreciate
I think that's
his
true.
lyricism, and
Right.
also his technical skill as a rapper. So he's almost like, in hip hop we say adding on. It's like Run DMC to me represented the first kind of renaissance in hip hop, when it was going away from the old school era of like dudes like dressing up in crazy outfits and doing these routines.
Like
Run
the
DMC,
Furious Five. Yeah.
exactly. I love all those groups, but it was going off in a different direction. And Run DMC brought it back to the streets, just like
Right.
elemental hard beats. They were dressing like drug dealers who they saw on the corner. And I think Wu-Tang in the 90s, that Run DMC was like 84, 85. Wu-Tang in the 90s represented another renaissance of hip hop, coming in at a time where the major labels were taking over. Rap had become really commercial in 1991. You had Young MC, Tone Loc, Young MC, Bust a Move,
Gerardo.
Oh yeah, Gerardo, and then MC Hammer and Vanilla Ice. Those were the biggest songs in 1991, and I think Wu-Tang brought it back to the street, back to the essence of hip hop, back to like basement beats.
Right.
I
Not
totally,
only that, but back to the East Coast as well.
Exactly. I totally respect what Dr. Dre and them were doing on the West Coast, but it was a whole different vibe. It was a West Coast vibe. It was that clean, riding in the back of the Chevy type music,
right.
Barbecue music,
Well, let me ask you this, Skiz.
Yeah.
What do you think, like in terms of your research for the book, right? What do you think of the different books that have been released by different members of the Wu-Tang? Like, I think RZA has 2 books, doesn't he? Doesn't he have like the Tao of Wu-Tang?
The Tao of Wu and the Wu-Tang Manual, and then
what did you make of those books?
I think they're all excellent. And
what's your favorite?
Well, to be honest, I love RZA's stuff, but You God's Raw is so raw. I mean, that's such a apt title. If you haven't read it, I would advise you to read it.
Yeah, I didn't get to that yet.
He gets really down into the gritty. He basically tells you like the recipe for making crack and how he got into that whole scene. And that's like real interesting stuff.
Right.
And I had the privilege of reading Raekwon's. I did a blurb for Raekwon's upcoming biography, which is coming out next month. It's called From Staircase to Stage.
Yeah.
And believe me, he does not disappoint, because Ray, the chef, is kind of like, known as like the real street dude in Wu-Tang. And
right.
He really breaks it down. He tells his own stories of how he came up, and that. I think all the members of Wu-Tang, I think Ghost is doing a book too. I think all the members of Wu-Tang need to do a biography, because my book can offer so much. To me, my book is more about the big picture and offering context,
Right.
What New York was like. What is the 5% of philosophy? You know, what
Yeah.
what did they learn from the kung fu movies? My book is
Mhm.
more about that, and also in section 2 of my book, Bring the Ruckus, I also break down all of the first round of solo albums, and I get like
Right.
deep down into the nitty gritty, deep down into the samples, analyzing the lyrics. But I think we need more books by artists themselves, and I'm really looking
I
forward
agree.
to. I'm really looking to go forward to Ghostface book because
Yeah.
you know he has had a crazy life, man.
Yeah.
He's had a
Yeah. I want to hear
really
about it.
he's had a
Well,
really
what's your opinion of like uh the documentary that was done by our colleague Sasha Jenkins, who has segued from hip hop journalist to director, and also the Hulu series? Like, what do you think of both of those?
okay. I think first of all, I think Jenkins did an amazing job with Of
Yeah,
Mics and Men.
I
You
liked
know, it's
it.
a 4-part series,
Right.
and even in that 4 parts, he doesn't even capture the whole of the Wu. That's what, and it's kind of like after watching that I felt like I had to do a book. Because
Okay.
a book can capture stuff that even a movie can't, you know. But
Mhm.
what I love about the Jenkins documentary is all the original footage, especially
Right.
one scene where they have, I don't know how they got this footage. They have all the Wu-Tang Clan members discussing. I think it was Protect Your Neck. They were discussing their verses on that,
I
and
think
they
so.
all look
Yeah.
so young. And like someone had the forethought to have like a VHS camcorder rolling during that, and
Yeah.
it just shows you how seriously they took the art form of lyricism too. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
and I think that's, you know, I think that's one of the things about Wu, because there's 9 of them and they're all such supreme lyricists. The competition was fierce, you know, and
Yeah. For sure.
you can hear it on Protect Your Neck. They were trying to top each other. You know,
Definitely.
they were fighting. They were not just fighting to get off the streets. They were fighting for placement on that. You know, because RZA would cut the worst verses. You know, so
Uh, uh,
but I saw first season of the Hulu and I liked it. I think the young actors did an amazing job. You know,
mhm.
I was a little skeptical at first, but I think the
Yeah.
best part of that Hulu series is these young actors. Season 2 steps into a lot of fiction, and it's really tough for me to watch
Interesting.
it,
Yeah.
knowing the real story of it, and
Right.
why did they fictionalize that part?
I wonder why they went that route.
Because like there's a scene in the first season where Just Ice approaches RZA when they're on tour,
All
and
right.
he's like, "What's today's mathematics?" You know, it's
Right.
like a 5%er thing,
Yeah.
and like RZA doesn't know, because like RZA's not in the series. He's like, "Oh, I don't know," and
Mm.
like Jizza has to come to his aid. But
Oh,
in real life, RZA was one of the youngest dudes to memorize the 120 lessons, the 120
right.
degrees of the Nation of
Right.
Islam.
Right.
He could recite those backwards and forwards when he was 12 years old. So
That's deep.
I don't know why he made himself look bad, you know?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Like, why that dramatic license?
yeah, yeah, you know. So it's
That's
I
interesting.
haven't really dove into season 2, but you know,
Yeah.
I can see what they're trying to do. It's a Hollywood
Sure.
version of the story, and you know,
Sure. Sure.
it's
No, I mean,
entertainment.
I'm glad that you got into the 5% Nation because it was so important to that era. You know, like growing up in the Bronx, I remember that transition from, let's say, 8th grade to 9th grade and entering high school. And all of a sudden, half the people in my hood, their names had changed, you know, because you would adopt different names. So it was like Ramon became Sincere and John became Justice. And, you know, it was all about like,
What was your righteous name, Miles?
I did not have a righteous name. My parents would have kicked my ass, you know. If I had come home talking about how it was God, that wouldn't have flown, you know.
my righteous name is Supreme King, Infinite Knowledge, Wisdom, and Understanding. That's
Really,
what Skiz stands for.
really.
I'm just joking with you.
I'm like,
But
that'll be hardcore, man. That'll be hardcore. No, but I remember that. You know, that was very definitely a big deal about how, you know, they would be in ciphers, they would be in a circle. reciting mathematics and stuff. It's like, you either had to live it or you don't know what
and it's not just Wu-Tang, it's Busta
Right.
Rhymes,
Of
Tribe
course.
Called Quest, Gangsta, all these dudes, all these dudes have been influenced by the 5%,
Yeah, that's a book in and of itself, how
Exactly.
how offshoot
Well,
of the nation.
there actually is a
touch.
book about that. There's actually a book about the Nation of Islam and hip hop, the 5%ers in hip hop.
Who wrote that?
An
Remember?
author by the name of I believe his last name is Kennedy. He's like a white 5%er, if you can dig.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But
Okay.
the book is deep, and I used it in
Right.
my research for my book. I used a lot of research of other people in my book. I have a stack of interviews of Wu-Tang like this from over the years. But when you're doing a book like this, you need to use all the information. So I use every interview, all the YouTube interviews.
I did the same with Kendrick. Yeah.
You have to do that.
Kind of stuff is essential. And I'm glad that we live in the age that we live in, where it's all at our fingertips, as opposed to going to the library and going to microfiche and, trying to.
But it's also important, Miles, that you knew Kendrick, that you met him several times. That you knew the man. It's important.
Yeah, definitely.
I've heard of some books that are out now where the person hasn't even met the person that they're doing the book on. I don't know how you can really do a book about someone if you never even met them in real life.
Yeah, that's a different animal. I had the pleasure of interviewing Kendrick while I worked for Ebony. I think I was at Ebony from maybe 2013 to 2016. And at some point I did a cover story on Kendrick. He was one of the first rappers ever on the cover. And To Pimp a Butterfly had just come out, and this is long before his Pulitzer win for Damn and all of that. But people were just so surprised, myself included, that To Pimp a Butterfly hit such a hard left from the previous album, Good Kid, Mad City, because there was such a jazz influence on To Pimp a Butterfly with the likes of Kamasi Washington and Thundercat and Flying Lotus and Robert Glasper and all these people. Like, he didn't have to do that. People were expecting Good Kid, Mad City 2, just more West Coast, hardcore. And he mixed it with like saxophone solos and stuff like that. It was like something that we really hadn't heard since maybe A Tribe Called Quest, in that way. Or The Roots.
A huge sophomore album. That was a huge sophomore album.
Yeah, and he pulled it off. It was really amazing.
So I'm going to jump in just to make sure that we have time for a couple of questions. That's all right, because I know you have to leave right at 6. All right. So Mark Villegas, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Are you there, Mark? Oh.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks. My name is Mark Villegas. I'm an assistant professor in American Studies at Franklin Marshall College. My question is about the Zulu Nation and a lot of the discussions around hip hop in the classes I teach and different places different panels I've been on. There's this authenticity type of debate on like real hip hop, fake hip hop, and the Bronx origin stories seems to be like the center point of authenticity. So I'm wondering if the Zulu Nation scandal with the sexual assault revelations regarding Africa Bambaataa, does that change the narrative at all about how we imagine the Bronx origin story? Does that not even matter when we reminisce about the good old days?
That's an interesting question. It's a good question. I mean, me personally, I feel like the allegations against Africa Bambaataa cannot be ignored. I feel like they've come up more than once from more than one mouth. And I feel like they need to be addressed. I understand that he stepped down from his leadership position with the Zulu Nation, and I feel like that was definitely for the best. Me personally, I believe the victims, and I'm not sure exactly what that means for his placement in hip hop. But to try to like sweep it under the table or anything like that, I think is sort of egregious. We can't do that, not in this day and age, or it should never at any point really have been done. I have read the memoir of Grandmaster Flash, and from what I understand, Kool Herc is at work on something for the 50th anniversary of hip hop in terms of telling his own story. And I feel that we're not really going to get Africa's story in a memoir form or whatever, because he would have to address this area that he probably is not going to want to speak on. How do you feel about it, Skiz?
I think you're absolutely right, but that said, I don't think it really reflects on the Zulu Nation and their influence on hip hop. You can never take that away.
Right, I
Because
agree.
at the time, you know, the Bronx was full of gangs, it was full of violence, and the Zulu Nation single-handedly changed that. And the Zulu Nation, you got to remember, is not just Bambaataa. He was the leader for sure, but the Zulu Nation galvanized all of the youth. And there's a lot of people who claim Zulu Nation. I don't think you can ever take away the influence that they have on hip hop. You know, it's a shame that all of this did happen now, but I mean, you like you said, Miles, you can't ignore it at this point.
Right.
You just can't ignore it.
No, I mean, the
But
story is what the story is in terms of Zulu Nation and in terms of the Black Spades and what they
Right.
did in the 70s, in terms of the gang violence that was going on and segueing out of that and into, sort of recombining the elements of hip hop in such a way that the youth had sort of a different outlet, that existed previously with the Savage Skulls and all of that. But we didn't know this other stuff was happening and when exactly it started to happen. And it's an unfortunate taint to Bambaataa's legacy.
And let me just add that in the 90s, I was actually working on a biography with Bambaataa, and we had actually started something, and I met him several times. And he had given me these essays that he wrote in high school. And these are just incredible essays.
Wow.
I still have like a photocopy of it where he talks about all the different gangs and what streets they were in. And this is a guy who in high school he won a trip to go to Africa.
Right.
And being in Africa and seeing how Black people run their own society without white people, and it would run a functioning society, and white people had nothing to do with it. And he brought this back to the Bronx.
Right.
I think you could never take that away, because
No.
that was like formative for hip hop. So Zulu Nation will always be part of the history of hip hop. It's just a shame that we now discover that the leader of the Zulu Nation. But the good thing about hip hop is there's so many characters involved. There's so many people involved. I talk about Herc, Flash, and Bambaataa being like the three kings in the beginning. And,
Sure.
It's all about adding on. It's all about adding on. People add on, and that's all I want to say about it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Africa Bambaataa for my first book, for the memoir about growing up in the Bronx, and that came out in 2004. And people have tried to, let's say KRS-One had an organization called the Temple of Hip Hop that he founded at the turn of the century. And it never took off quite in the same way as the Zulu Nation. It was a different time period, and it just didn't gel in that way. The Zulu Nation, their influence was felt worldwide. I lived in Paris from 2004 to 2011, and my time over there talking to different French MCs whose histories date back to the 80s, they were members of the Zulu Nation, and they remember Bam coming over there and sort of giving them the blessing to establish chapters in Paris, So it's like a far-reaching thing.
Okay, we have another question. Antonia, do you want to unmute?
Sure. Thank y'all for talking about your books. I look forward to reading both of them. This question is more for Skiz. Think about the size of Wu-Tang, and I don't think we've seen a crew of accomplished MCs as big since, and even before. And so I was wondering if either of you had thoughts about what made it possible for Wu-Tang to have the center hold so that so many MCs could come together and work towards a common cause. And why aren't there more like large groups of rap groups today? Do you have any ideas about? why that
That's a
happened.
good question. I think the economics have a lot to do with it.
Right.
First of all, Wu-Tang, the template of Wu-Tang having a huge crew like that, there is precedence for that in old school hip hop. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, Funky Four plus one more. These were big crews, you know. And you know, I talk about the Bronx because Wu-Tang has a direct connection to the Bronx. You know, GZA's father's from Soundview Projects, and he used to take RZA to see jams there. But the thing that made Wu-Tang different was, I think a lot of it had to do with Staten Island too. Like Staten Island is its own, you know, it's kind of isolated. So kind of hip hop developed at its own speed there. And even though these guys used to leave the island and go to hip hop parties in Manhattan and stuff, they had their own little space to grow. And, you know, each individual member had a connection to RZA. And that's why they allowed him to basically drive the bus and say, look, this is my vision. If you sign on to it, I'm going to take, in 5 years, we're going to be number one. And I think you just got to give the credit to the RZA, because you don't get too many people like that, too many young people. I mean, he must have been like 20, 21 at the time, you know,
Right.
to have that type of vision and to be able to communicate it to other people who were involved in the street game and say, listen, you don't have to be doing this. You can make music like I'm doing. You know, each of the guys used to come to his crib and record on their own. But I think the economics of it is really what's preventing that from happening again. Because even when go ahead, Mark.
No, I would add on to this that one thing we haven't mentioned is the influence or the precedent of George Clinton. Because George Clinton in the 70s was able to sign the same band to like 5 different record labels, you know, whether it was the Brides of Funkenstein or it was like Bootsy's Rubber Band, you know, from his bass player, Bootsy Collins, or, you know, it was like Parliament Funkadelic, you know, were 2 different bands. It was sort of like giving the same, it was a slightly different flavor of funk naturally, but basically signing the same group of players to a bunch of different labels was like, you know, a huge heist against the record company system, you know, and Wu-Tang did the same thing. So in terms of the economics of the situation, like if you have the Wu-Tang Clan where they're signed to a label and they have to split their profits 9 ways, that's not, you know, a great economical situation. However, if each one of them has their own solo career where they're signing their own solo deal, well then it's all gravy, you know, like they popularize themselves through the group and then, you know, have these flourishing solo careers. Like, you know, that's a beautiful thing. That makes sense. You know, that was part of RZA's brilliance. And I think that the last great hip hop group might have been like G Unit with 50 Cent's G Unit or something like that. Like, I think that there was a point at the turn of the millennium where I guess hip hop realized, or hip hop groups realized, you know, there wasn't as much, they wouldn't make as much money if they had to split the profits. And so, you know, there's been ever since this proliferation of just solo MCs out for themselves. You know, there have been collectives like Odd Future, but Odd Future sort of resembles like the Native Tongues model of a Tribe Called Quest.
It's more like a crew.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And there's not like an Odd Future record, you know, they're just sort of affiliated with each other. Even Kendrick with Black Hippie, you know, like there's not a Black Hippie record of Schoolboy Q and Kendrick and Ab Soul and J-Rock. Like, you know, they affiliate themselves with one another, but it's an economics thing.
And I think money is probably what's keeping, you know, another Wu-Tang Clan album from happening right now, because now you have 9 individual entities. They all have their individual managers. Before it was all under one umbrella, Wu-Tang Management, which was Divine, you know, RZA's brother. And then as you saw in of Mics and Men, they had a falling out. So now each member has their own manager.
With their own lawyer.
Exactly. So like to do, I mean, the fans would love it to see another Wu-Tang album.
Right.
And But, you know, I think it's the economics that's preventing that, you know?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a great conversation. Thank you to Miles and Skiz. Please join us next week when Kalefa Sene will be in conversation with Carl Wilson about his forthcoming book, Major Labels, A History of Popular Music in 7 Genres. And we hope to see you next week.
Thank you.